I had booked a stay at an Airbnb for 3 days, seeking a brief escape from the routine of daily life. The property was a small house nestled in the woods, though it wasn't entirely secluded. It sat within a neighborhood where the trees and land created a sense of space between the homes. Having never used a vacation rental service before, I was unfamiliar with the typical procedures and didn't really know what to expect from the experience. When I finally pulled into the driveway around 5:00 p.m., I was surprised to find that the rental was actually a secondary home located on the same property as the main house, sitting only about 10 feet away from it. While I had been hoping for a bit more privacy than a backyard guest house provided, I tried to remain optimistic and figured the proximity wouldn't be much of an issue. As I began unloading my luggage and groceries from my car, an older man emerged from the main house and approached me. He introduced himself as Evan, the host of the property. He was in his 50s and was quite a large man, tall, heavily built, with a thick gray beard that dominated his face. Despite his polite introduction, I felt an immediate and inexplicable wave of unease wash over me. Something about his presence just didn't feel right. He didn't say anything overtly threatening, but he repeatedly referred to me as Buddy, which felt forced and slightly condescending. After a few minutes of small talk, he finally left me to settle into the house. I hoped that would be the extent of our interaction, dismissing my initial discomfort as just an overactive imagination regarding a weird but harmless stranger. Once I was settled inside, I spent some time relaxing on the couch before realizing I hadn't eaten. It was getting late, around 8:30 p.m., when I started preparing a dinner I had been looking forward to. I had picked up a ribeye steak from the grocery store on my way to the rental, thinking it would be a nice treat for my first night. Although I was exhausted from the trip, I fried it up quickly in a pan and ate it by itself, too tired to bother with side dishes. Immediately afterward, I took a warm shower and collapsed into bed, falling into a deep sleep within minutes. The next morning, I woke up without any specific plans other than stocking up on more supplies. After a cup of coffee to clear my head, I decided to head back into town early to get the shopping over with so I could spend the rest of the day in total relaxation. I spent about an hour at the store picking up food and drinks for the remainder of my stay. However, the moment I pulled back into the driveway of the rental, Evan was already walking out of his house. He waved at me, and I hoped a simple wave back would suffice, but he didn't stop at his porch. He began walking directly toward my car as I was getting out to grab my grocery bags. He stood uncomfortably close to me, almost looming over me, and asked how my first night had been and if everything was to my liking. I gave a short, polite answer saying everything was great, and he just nodded with a smile. Then he caught me completely off guard by asking, "How'd the steak turn out last night?" I froze, my mind racing as a cold knot formed in my stomach. How could he possibly have known exactly what I had cooked for dinner the night before? My shock must have been visible on my face because I began to stutter, trying to find an explanation for how he possessed that information. Evan quickly interjected, claiming that I had told him about the steak during our brief introduction the previous day. I just nodded and hurried back inside the house, but I felt sick. I tried to replay our first conversation in my head, but I was almost certain I hadn't mentioned my dinner plans to him. I had been too focused on how uncomfortable he made me feel. It felt highly unlikely that I would have randomly shared such a specific detail with a stranger. Furthermore, the fact that he came out of his house solely to ask me that one question, only to return inside immediately afterward, felt deliberate and predatory. The uneasy feeling I had from the start intensified into genuine fear. I tried to rationalize it again, telling myself that maybe I was just forgetful or that some hosts are just overly attentive to their guests. For the next few hours, I found myself constantly glancing out the windows, checking to see if Evan was outside or watching me from his porch. I didn't see him, which provided a small amount of relief, and eventually the day passed quietly. I made another dinner, watched some television, and went to bed, hoping that the rest of my stay would be as boring as the afternoon had been. However, the peace didn't last. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I hadn't heard a specific noise, but I woke up with an overwhelming sense of dread. My skin was crawling and I felt incredibly exposed. I sat up in the dark, and after a minute of silence, the feeling that something was off became so strong that I had to get up and inspect the house. I moved through the quiet rooms with a heavy heart, eventually reaching the front door. When I reached for the handle, I realized with a shock that the door was completely unlocked. I opened it slightly and peered out into the darkness. The yard was silent, but across the lawn, a single light was on in Evan's otherwise dark house. I quickly locked the door, but in my tired state, I tried to convince myself I had simply forgotten to lock it earlier. I went back to bed, but I didn't truly sleep, and by 5:00 a.m., I was wide awake and staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was truly alone in that house. The sun hadn't even broken the horizon yet, but I was wide awake, the heavy silence of the cabin pressing in on me. That lingering feeling of being watched was no longer just a suspicion. It was a physical weight on my chest. Every strange occurrence since I had arrived, the host's odd behavior, his inexplicable knowledge of my dinner and the unlocked door, began to coalesce into a terrifying picture. I knew I couldn't stay a second longer. I got dressed quickly and began walking through the house, but this time I wasn't just checking rooms. I was searching with a desperate intensity, looking for anything that felt out of place. In the kitchen, my eyes landed on a small black charging brick plugged into an outlet. Initially, when I had arrived, I hadn't given it a second thought, assuming it was a complimentary charger for guests. It even had a cable dangling from it to complete the illusion. But as I leaned in closer, my heart stopped. On the front of the brick was a tiny, reflective dot, a lens. It was a hidden camera. A wave of nausea hit me as I realized I had been monitored from the moment I stepped inside. I pulled it from the wall, my hands trembling, and ran to the other rooms. My nightmare was confirmed. Nearly every room had one of these devices plugged in, including the bedroom where I had slept. I was in the middle of frantically gathering my things when a heavy pounding erupted at the front door. It was Evan. His voice was loud and filled with a strange, panicked urgency, demanding that I open the door so he could check a few things. He called out that he knew I was inside, his knocks becoming quicker and more violent. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He must have seen me unplugging the cameras. He was monitoring the live feed and knew I had discovered his secret. I ignored his shouts and began throwing my belongings into my suitcase as fast as humanly possible, knowing I was in a race against time. Pounding suddenly stopped, replaced by a silence that was far more terrifying. I froze, straining to hear over the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then I heard the faint metallic click of a key turning. He was unlocking the door. Without thinking, I slammed the bedroom door shut, grabbed my suitcase, and scrambled out of the window. I hit the ground hard just as I heard the bedroom door being forced open behind me. I didn't look back. I made a dead sprint for my car, fueled by pure terror. I fumbled with the keys, threw the car into gear, and roared out of the driveway, leaving the house and Evan far behind. I drove for an hour before stopping at a hotel, my mind racing. After calling friends and family to recount the horror, I decided to contact the police. However, the confrontation didn't go the way I had hoped. When the officers went to question Evan, he was perfectly composed. He allowed them to look around, but the charging bricks were gone, and he denied every single thing I had reported. It was my word against his, and with no physical evidence left at the scene, the police couldn't take any action. I eventually saw that he removed the listing from the rental site, but the psychological damage was done. To this day, the thought of those hidden lenses and the sound of that key turning in the lock still haunts me, a permanent reminder that you never truly know who is watching.